Chapter 19. How do you choose a gender from 63 genders? What roles do we play? If you don't get what you want, you suffer. If you get what you don't want, you suffer. Even when you get exactly what you want, you still suffer because you can't hold on to it forever. Your mind is your predicament. It wants to be free of change, free of pain, free of the obligations of life and death. But change is law, and no amount of pretending will alter that reality. In the Western world today, at the time of writing, there are now 63 genders. For a very long time in history, there have been only two: men and women. Instead of two flavors of ice cream, chocolate and vanilla, we are now sporting 63 obscure and minority flavors of ice cream, and I'm not sure if anyone can name all 63 flavors. I cannot even come close, and I would venture to say that a PhD in gender studies would need to look at a chart to name all 63 genders. Does anyone really understand all 63 genders? If you Google, "How many genders are there?" you will find some sources claiming 33 genders, some claiming 63 genders, and some claiming hundreds of genders. Quora lists 112 genders. Why can't we just have men and women? Mom and dad? Everything used to be so simple. So how many genders are there? And how do we choose our gender out of 63 varieties? This is like asking how many shades of gray there are between black and white. No one can really say, but all know black and we all know white. Only in today's world, with the frontier of survival so far away from home in our cities and civilizations, would we consider having 63 genders? In societies that spend most of their time and energy on survival and food getting, there is no time to even consider anything outside of men and women. Survival is too important, and the tribe must survive and replicate to keep on going and self-perpetuate. Throughout history, there have always been men and women, and they were reciprocal. They fit together like puzzle pieces, and they each played a role. Men had a specific role, and they did what was required of them. They may or may not have been happy or satisfied with their roles, but it didn't matter. The men did their work. The women had a role as well, and no one asked them if they were happy or if their dreams were being fulfilled. They played their role and did their jobs, whatever those were at the time. When survival was a constant consideration, men and women simply did their jobs and what it took to survive and perhaps thrive in the hostile environment around them. Today's environment is too friendly and is explicitly not hostile. So, man with his infinite creativity has turned his creativity inward to create 63 genders that are somewhat meaningless and unnameable to the average person. Roles are important to make groups of people function. In the group, everyone has a role that makes sense and ensures the survival of the species. Below are some groups that have strongly defined roles to function and perform whatever is important to the group's survival. Imagine an orchestra where everyone played whatever notes they wanted, whenever they wanted, with no specific instrument players and everyone switching instruments all the time. The music would sound terrible, and the orchestra would sell no tickets and make no revenue because of the cacophony of bad and evil sounds. Eventually, this group would go bankrupt and cease to exist if it could not produce music to entertain an audience or any ticket sales. Imagine a hockey team with no positions, no defense, no offense, no goalie, no center, no left wing, and no right wing. The players would skate around aimlessly, and this team would lose every game to more organized teams and never make the playoffs. Imagine an army with no ranks and no roles. This army would certainly be wiped out by better organized armies, and the army without roles would cease to exist. Imagine a company or corporation where everyone did whatever they felt like every day. The company would quickly run out of money and go out of business. This book exists to ask the question, what does it mean to be a man? The idea of 63 genders are out of left field relative to what does it mean to be a man, that I'm not sure the two topics are compatible. What does it mean to be a man is a simple question looking to simplify the overcomplicated, feminized, gender-neutral definitions of what a man is. Where a man has been homogenized into a person instead of a man, the prospect of 63 genders dilutes the idea of men to the point of meaningless complexity. The book of Genesis in the Bible describes the Tower of Babel. In the story, people conspire to build a tower so high that it will reach God. Seeing this, God confounded their speech, making the people speak many different languages. With the words of others no longer coherent, humanity could not communicate to finish the tower. They could not function together and had to be scattered across the earth. Part of the problem and the reason why I wrote this book in the first place is that it is nearly impossible to define a man in today's Western world with the junkyard of ideals that are imposed on a simple creature like a man. 63 genders, or the need to have 63 genders, further destroys the simple idea of what it means to be a man, and fragments the idea into pieces that are very difficult to put together in a functioning, harmonious way. Are 63 genders even enough? What about 120? What about 500 genders? When do we say enough is enough, and we have discovered all the genders? When I was young in school in the 1990s, we had 9 planets in the solar system. Pluto was the most distant planet in the solar system. Then one day when I was older, Pluto was no longer a planet according to science. I have recently heard that Pluto is now a planet again. Apparently, Pluto's official planet status is still up for debate, but I don't really care that much to keep track of its official status. The Pluto approach to planets is confusing. The Pluto approach to genders is also confusing. When you split into 63 genders, the question shifts from what is a man to what is a gender. We are now heading down the road to utter meaninglessness. Just like the Tower of Babel, where people could no longer communicate in a meaningful way, we live in a Tower of Babel world where there are so many subgroups and minorities with power and media channels that it seems that there is not one coherent message anymore. This is confusing to simple people trying to answer, what does it mean to be a man? We explored homosexual and heterosexual men, and deduced that men are just sexual and that homosexuals were either functioning in their roles of men or not functioning as men but as boys instead. That makes sense. Just like the men who are avoiding their manly duties of getting married to women and starting families but are playing boyish video games all day and indulging in porn. But when you open the game up to 63 varieties of sub-men and sub-women, the question of what does it mean to be a man becomes almost impossible to answer. The complexity of 63 genders takes us further away from the simple truth and functionality that there are men and there are women, and they have simple, attractive roles to play that are complementary and reciprocal. They form a unit that can have children. They can reproduce, and this is how humanity has been able to grow and prosper from small tribes of a few people into the 7 billion people of today who are all surviving and living because of men and women. An extreme minority of people would define themselves as one of 63 genders, and extreme minorities are just that, extreme minorities. They should not be given the same power of majorities because they simply are a minority. If something is complex, it means you don't understand it. I would argue that no one understands a system of 63 genders, and therein is where a lie must exist. I would even challenge a gender studies professor to name all 63 genders by heart, and I would love to see all 63 named from memory without reference materials by a gender studies professor. On a side note, The Hungarian government recently abolished the subject of gender studies entirely in their universities, citing that it had no real value in the job market and that gender studies were taking away important resources from other university programs and failing to give students anything of real value. Everyone understands a two-gender system. Everyone had parents as a prerequisite to being born, a sperm and an egg, a mom and a dad. Mom and dad had sex, which created life, and you were born out of that. The concept makes sense. The man does certain things. The woman does certain things. This system is simple, it's repeatable, it can reproduce and self-replicate, because that is how we were designed. Success is repeatable. Men and women with roles is the most repeatable proven system in history. The Tower of Babel fell apart because the people could not form a coherent unit. Are we becoming the Tower of Babel today when it comes to gender? Recently, we have violated this repeatable, successful, reproductive, and self-perpetuating system. As a consequence, our tribe will suffer when we encounter a tribe of intolerant and violent barbarians, much in the way that the tolerant and weak Rome was sacked by the primitive, intolerant Germanic tribes. Who could these barbarians be? Simply look at the more primitive barbarian tribes that America sees as rivals and enemies. 1. Islam is in a holy war with the West from their perspective and a war on terrorism from an American perspective. 2. Russia has historically been a rival of America since World War II. 3. China, who is America's current economic rival. And 4. African nations are, by proxy of Islam and being have-not countries, are rivals as well. America has several enemies worldwide, just as Rome had enemies at the fringes of its empire. When we succumb to weakness and to nonsense, that is where decline starts. As the weakness grows and exposes bigger holes, that is where the tolerant group is enslaved or killed by the intolerant group. Anything successful can be replicated. I'm not sure if people in a 63-gender tribe can replicate or reproduce fast enough to have a positive birth rate or enough cohesion to form a functioning unit over time. Or would the group just disband like a bad orchestra where none of the instruments ever really go together to form harmonious music? If you win the lottery, that's great for you. You might have $10 million cash in the bank the next day, but you aren't a success because you can't repeat winning the lottery by your own will. Below is a list of the proposed 63 genders of the modern day. I would argue that the same definition of success applies to groups of people, companies, armies, governments, and even tribes made up of people who are in the middle genders of 63 genders. Can these 63 genders reproduce and become their own tribe of people? I highly doubt it without the use of an artificial system to promote fertility. There is too much variation and too many compatibility issues and preferences. How do you play matchmaker with 63 different genders and preferences? This is like a menu at a restaurant with 63 types of food, and you aren't sure what to order, so you walk out and go to a restaurant that is good at 1 or 2 dishes only. None of the best restaurants in the world are buffets. Do we need a buffet of genders? Are any of the dishes any good at a 63-dish buffet? Usually not. But you can have 2 really good dishes at a restaurant that focuses and defines its 2 really good dishes, instead of trying to make 63 dishes to please everyone and no one at the same time. It's common sense that 2 well-defined concepts will be better than 63 ill-defined concepts. This is true for food, music, art, and business, and it's general common sense. Common sense is uncommon, though. I don't think 63 genders could form its own coherent tribe. I have seen no historical evidence of a tribe that survived and grew to be mighty with 63 gender concepts to mix and match to reproduce. But groups of 2 genders only, men and women, form mighty nations. Germans are their own group. The French are their own group. The Chinese, the East Indians, the Americans are their own groups. Each group can self-propagate, grow, and prosper in great ideas and inventions. 63 minority genders cannot self-propagate effectively over the long term. Are there any examples in history where a group of 63 genders have lasted 200 years? Or 1,000 years? Or do regular men and women take over, and the 63 genders are just an artificial construct that are a temporary idea to be swept away by permanent truth over time? If you drop down an assortment of 63 gendered people into a group in the forest or on farmland, could you check on them in 50 years and find that their tribe had grown in number? Or would they be in decline? Could they maintain a positive birth rate of 2.1 or 2.2 to replace their dead every generation? To answer that question, men and women in the Western world are only breeding at a rate of 1.2 children per couple, which is a negative birth rate and already in decline. That's regular straight men and women. They are currently failing at replacing themselves to keep our society alive. Now imagine we added 63 genders into the mix. We would be wiped out so fast from our own preferences, feelings over reason, and the need to be different. Chances are, the tribe made up of 63 unique genders would shrink in size and in a few generations then cease to exist. Furthermore, any children bred from a 63 gender tribe would likely be just regular heterosexual masculine men and regular heterosexual feminine women, eliminating the 63 minorities quickly. 63 genders are created out of collecting all the minority outliers and giving each variation power to the point of meaninglessness. This is impractical and takes our minds off the real problems at hand, such as our survival of the tribe. That is why the government of Hungary realized this and abolished the subject of gender studies. Hard times are coming, so we will need strong men to bail us out. We live in a strange world today, where every group and every minority have a megaphone, a channel, an outlet to scream at the top of their lungs for special treatment. We are living in the new Tower of Babel. It didn't work then, and it won't work now. In the case of 63 genders, the system makes very little practical sense, and I'm not sure why we would need 63 or 100 or 200 genders. Men and women are already not functioning on a basic level and are already into negative birth rates. 50% of marriages are ending in divorce. And when divorce occurs, 70% of wealth is lost. Why complicate an already poorly functioning system of 2 genders with an even poorer functioning system of 63 genders? To even suggest further complication when the system is already failing is madness and an idea generated from the mind of an insane person. Why complicate something that already isn't working more? For feelings. To be unique and special? To be a unique and beautiful snowflake? It wasn't hard enough anyways? To feed our subjective preferences? All of the above? Or none of the above? The big question comes down to, does this idea function in real life? I would say the answer is no. 63 genders is a special luxury that comes from our tolerant, weak, yet advanced Western society, where every minority has its own megaphone and is protected from the harsh realities of trying to survive each day in the wilderness or against other hostile tribes. The idea of 63 genders has grown out of the imagination of a human animal that has too much creative energy built up from not having to focus on survival, and the frontiers of survival are so far away that we create nonsense to pass the time. In our current Tower of Babel, where minorities are ruling the roost, whoever screams the loudest gets attention from politicians to buy the votes of as many groups as possible for the lowest possible price. In primitive, warrior cultures and tolerant societies like the Muslim countries of today, I can almost guarantee that if you even think about saying you are one of 63 genders, you will be thrown into a pit and stoned to death. Intolerant societies are strong societies, and they usually increase in power over time until they become empires and then slip into decline like the Western world. Our tolerance is our weakness. Their intolerance is their strength. Hard times create strong men. Welcome to the Islamic countries and African third world countries where times are hard. You have to be tough to survive. Our perpetual good times in the West have created multiple generations of weak men and tolerance. We are the weakened empire, and the barbarians are at the gates. They are intolerant, and they are violent. So if we have 63 genders today, and if these genders have always existed but were not properly documented, where were all the non-heterosexual men and women existing throughout history? What did we do with the other 61 configurations of men and women in the world if they always existed? What was the previous procedure for handling these people? They do not dominate the history books, which would suggest that throughout history, they were not really recognized, marginalized, intimidated to be normal, or simply killed. If these people are here now, they must have always existed. So where did previous versions of our Western society put the 63 transgender people if they always existed and were indeed naturally occurring in nature? In today's world, we put the minorities on the big stage with the big lights. We give them big microphones with very loud speakers, and we celebrate how different and special they are. They are snowflakes, beautiful and unique. We host parades for them, and our leaders, our prime ministers and presidents, wave and march in the parade, smiling and happy to win the votes of these fringe groups and gain power. Not long ago, these minority genders were locked up deep inside the dungeons of mental institutions and were called crazy people in the past. Men who thought they were women were likely thrown into the darkness of the mental institutions or called perverts and incarcerated into a prison system. Those men who used to be called perverts are now allowed to call themselves women and share a bathroom with a real 11-year-old girl, and this is just getting strange. How can you prove that the man is a transgender and not just a crazy pervert? Not long ago, he would be in prison or a mental instruction for the same claims. And now we invite him into the girls' bathroom with young girls. This doesn't seem like a common sense good idea. Why must we bend over backwards for any group who screams the loudest? The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. In less tolerant countries in the not-so-distant past, these unique groups of people were certainly killed because intolerant groups do not tolerate variations in men and women. The roles are defined when the group is concerned with its own survival. Desmond Morris in The Human Zoo iterated that as the densities and populations of humans grew over time, that is where non-normal behavior started to show. Put these same people in the wild, put them in a low-density environment, and would they change? The evidence is shown in animals, so why not humans? Another place you would see these transgendered people would have been in the traveling circus. Have you ever heard of going to see the bearded lady at the freak show? That was likely where some of the transgender people were before we recently promoted them from the sideshow to the main stage in our society. Rome fell when it turned into breads and circuses. The Western world is turning into a circus every day when you take the sideshow and promote it to the main act. Another place you would find these unique creatures would have been the local eccentric dandies of the time who dressed in the energy of the opposite sex and likely held jobs as entertainers or something on the fringes. The fringe has always been there in very small numbers. Somehow today, the fringe is the main attraction, and the previous main attraction, strong men who used to be the kings, fathers, Community leaders, military leaders, and captains of industry have lost the spotlight to people who subjectively redefine themselves depending on how they feel that day. This is just plain weird. If you were to explain the idea of 63 genders to people in primitive countries where they focus on getting food for survival every day, countries in Asia, Africa, South America, or Eastern Europe, the ideas we have adopted are ridiculous and far-fetched because the primitive, intolerant countries focus only on food getting every day to live. Such is life and survival. These people living on the frontier of survival are explicitly not thinking about which gender they are or how much a sex change would cost. They are not trying to convince their 4-year-old boy to take hormone blockers and make him girl. Shame on us for considering that with a 4-year-old who is barely not an infant. The 4-year-old can't make a decision on his gender yet. How could he? He's only 4. A 4-year-old can barely communicate and was in diapers not long ago. He doesn't even have his adult teeth yet. Letting him pick a gender is a ridiculous idea. What if he picks wrong and has some surgery or therapy too early and wants to switch back because he was confused? That is a disaster. It has lots of downside, with limited upside just to satisfy his unique and emotional need to be a snowflake. If you are a man, you must choose to be a man, play your role in society and stick to it. To do anything else is unmanly, including switching genders to one of the other 63 options. There is one way to succeed in life and a million ways to fail. Choose success, and ways that are self-sustaining and repeatable over snowflake ideas based in emotion and feelings, which turn out to be false at some point anyways. Stick to reason, stick to common sense, stick to simplicity. Often, the simpler the idea, the better. To complicate things just means you don't understand it enough. To be a man is a simple idea. Don't make it complicated. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself.